I was on a business trip when my phone buzzed. It was my cleaning lady. Her voice was trembling. "Ma'am, I think there's someone in your house." I laughed at first, until she sent me the video. My husband was standing on the stairs, whispering to someone in the dark. But we lived alone, and that voice he was whispering to, it whispered my name back. If you've ever trusted someone completely, this story will change the way you look at love and safety. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you dare to watch the footage from your own home cameras? I replayed that video over and over, even when I knew exactly what I would see. The dim hallway, the faint yellow glow from the stair light, and my husband, Daniel, standing barefoot on the steps, talking to someone hidden behind the banister. He wasn't angry or startled. He looked calm, too calm. He leaned slightly forward like he was comforting someone. And then that whisper, the one that made my blood run cold. A woman's voice, soft, broken, my voice, or something that sounded just like it. I remember sitting on the edge of that hotel bed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the room. Outside, it was raining in Portland, steady, endless rain that always reminded me of home. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't want to go home. Daniel and I weren't perfect, but we were steady. That's the word I used whenever people asked how we'd lasted this long. He was a book editor, quiet, patient, almost painfully meticulous. I was the one who laughed too loud, who left coffee mugs everywhere. He was logic, I was instinct. And somehow that balance worked. When I got promoted at the design firm, Daniel was the first to open a bottle of champagne. He said, "You've earned this, Nora. Go out there and shine." He even helped me pack for the conference, folded my blouses with that maddening precision of his. He kissed me goodbye at the airport, said he'd miss me. I believed him. I always believed him. So when Carly, my cleaning lady, called that night, the first thing I felt wasn't fear, it was embarrassment. I thought she was mistaken, or maybe she'd turned on the wrong camera feed. But then she sent the video file, and all that certainty I'd built my marriage on started to crack like thin glass. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was talking on speakerphone. Maybe he was rehearsing something, a script. Daniel edited audiobooks sometimes. Maybe it was part of that. Yes, that had to be it. He wasn't the type of man who whispered in the dark to anyone but himself. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his hand moved. The video was shaky, but I could see it clearly. His fingers brushing the air in front of him, like he was tucking someone's hair behind their ear. It wasn't a work gesture, it was intimate. That night, I barely slept. I muted my hotel room TV, turned off all the lights, and watched the ceiling until the sun came up. Every time I blinked, I saw that frame, Daniel's silhouette against the stairlight, the empty house behind him, and that whisper that sounded just like me. The next morning, I texted Carly. She apologized for calling so late, said she hadn't meant to scare me, but she'd felt something weird. Her exact words were, "It wasn't just him talking, ma'am. I heard 2 sets of footsteps, but when I looked again, there was only one person in the frame." My throat went dry reading that. Carly wasn't the type to make up stories. She was 22, a college student trying to make ends meet. Always polite, always soft-spoken. I'd hired her after my old cleaner retired. Daniel used to joke that she reminded him of our niece. He'd even said, "You can trust her, Nora. She's like family." Family. That word used to mean comfort. Now it felt like a curse. I didn't tell Carly what I'd seen. I thanked her, paid her extra for the inconvenience, and told her not to go back until I returned. She agreed, too quickly, almost as if she was relieved to stay away. I checked out of the hotel early. The drive back home should have been 4 hours, but I don't remember a single mile of it. My hands were cold on the steering wheel the whole time. I kept picturing Daniel, his lips moving in the dark, that gentle, familiar tone. Who was he talking to? Why was he smiling? When I finally pulled into our driveway, everything looked normal. The porch light was on, the curtains were drawn, and Daniel's car sat exactly where it always did, clean and perfectly parked. If not for that video on my phone, I could have convinced myself nothing had happened. But the moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. heavier, damp, like the house itself was holding its breath. There was a faint scent in the hallway, something floral but faintly metallic. Not my perfume, not his either. And from upstairs, I could swear I heard a voice, low, humming softly, like someone talking in their sleep. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, every instinct screaming. That was the same staircase from the video, the same light, the same place where my husband had whispered into the dark. And somewhere above me, something, or someone, whispered back. When you've been married for 15 years, you stop noticing the little creaks in your house, the stairs that moan when you step on the third one from the bottom, the pipes that hum whenever the shower runs upstairs. They blend into the soundtrack of your life, background noise you trust without thinking. That was how Daniel and I lived, steady, predictable, safe. At least, that's what I believed. We met in a bookstore. It sounds cliche, but it's true. I was 26, sketching fabric patterns for a design portfolio. He was browsing the philosophy section with the same seriousness he later brought into every argument. He asked if I believed people could ever really know each other. I said, I hope so, otherwise what's the point? He smiled, that slow, careful smile that made you think he was already writing you into a sentence somewhere. Back then, that look made me feel seen. Now, when I remember it, it feels like being studied. Daniel was a man of quiet rituals. Coffee at 6 a.m, news at 7, silence before 9. He called it discipline. I called it comfort. He always smelled faintly of paper and cedar, the scent of old books and order. Even after all these years, I can close my eyes and picture him in his worn grey sweater, pen behind his ear, reading margins like they were secret codes. He hated surprises. Maybe that's why the video felt like one, not just shocking, but impossible. Before the trip, we'd been fine, or maybe we'd just stopped arguing loud enough to notice the cracks. The night I left for Portland, he packed my charger, kissed my forehead and said, "Promise me you'll actually rest this time. Don't turn the hotel into your office." I laughed. "And what would you do if I did?" He said, "Worry less, love more." That was Daniel. Words that sounded deep enough to believe in, but light enough to disappear after you heard them. He texted me that first night, "Maid pasta, house feels too quiet without you." I sent him a heart emoji. The next morning, he didn't reply. I told myself he was busy editing. When I got back home after seeing the video, I walked through each room like a stranger. Everything was exactly in place. The tidy kitchen counter, the couch blanket folded into a perfect square, Daniel's kind of order. But there was something else, something underneath the neatness, like a breath you could feel but not hear. Our bedroom felt colder than the rest of the house. The window was cracked open, letting in the smell of rain. Daniel had always hated drafts. I closed it and ran my fingers along the nightstand. No dust, no sign of anyone else. But on his side of the bed, the sheet was wrinkled. Too wrinkled for just one night. That's when I saw it, a long blonde hair curled near his pillow. My hair's dark brown. I told myself it could have been from Carly, maybe when she cleaned earlier in the week. Still, I wrapped it in tissue and dropped it into the trash like evidence I wasn't ready to look at. People think betrayal feels like an explosion. It doesn't. It's quiet. It hums beneath the noise of everyday life until, one morning, you realize the hum is all you can hear. That afternoon, Daniel came home early from the store. He looked normal, smiling, relaxed, even happy to see me. He hugged me longer than usual, too long. When he pulled back, his eyes scanned my face, searching for something, maybe guilt, maybe doubt. "You came home early," he said, voice light but controlled. "Everything okay?" "Just missed you," I lied. He nodded, kissed my forehead again, the same rehearsed gesture he'd used for years. I wanted to ask about the video right then. Instead, I asked what he had for lunch. He said, "Leftovers." The pasta, I thought. But when I opened the fridge later, the container was untouched. That night, I couldn't stay in the bedroom. I told him I needed to finish work and slept in the guest room. He didn't argue. He never did. That was his way of keeping control, by never fighting back. I lay awake, listening. At some point, around midnight, I heard the floorboard near the stairs creak. Then another. Then the faint sound of Daniel's voice, low and rhythmic, like someone murmuring a bedtime story. I wanted to believe he was on a call, but no words carried clearly, only the tone, calm, tender. Then a whisper, softer than breath. It wasn't his, and it came from above him. The next morning, Daniel acted as if nothing happened. He made breakfast, asked about my meetings, kissed the top of my head before leaving for work. I smiled back, pretending. But inside, something had shifted. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the subtle echo of his footsteps as he left. Everything ordinary had turned suspicious. I spent the rest of that day pretending to clean, but really I was investigating. I checked the laundry, the closets, even the attic door, which hadn't been opened in years. The lock was dusty, untouched. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been up there. When Daniel got home, I asked casually, "Did you hear anything strange last night?" He frowned. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Maybe the pipes again." He chuckled. "You and your ghosts, Nora." Then he reached for my hand and squeezed it. "Promise me you won't let your imagination run away while I'm gone next week." Gone next week? I hadn't heard about another trip, but he said it so naturally, as if it had already been decided. "I need a few days out of town," he added, pouring himself wine. "Editorial retreat, just me and the manuscript." He didn't look up when he said it, and that was when I realized something terrifying. He was planning this. The distance, the silence, the control. That night, I reopened Carly's video. Frame by frame, I watched Daniel turn his head toward the shadow beside him. There, barely visible, a hand resting on the stair rail, small, delicate, pale, not mine, not Carly's, someone else's. And just before the clip ended, a second shadow crossed the wall behind them, thin, feminine, leaning closer. The file cut off there. I stared at the black screen until my reflection stared back. For the first time, I wasn't sure which of us looked more like the ghost. I've always believed that love makes you rationalize the impossible. You see what you want to see, you explain away the red flags until they turn into decorations. That's what I did, for days, after watching that video. I told myself the camera had glitched. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe the hand I saw on the railing belonged to Carly before she moved the camera. Maybe the whisper wasn't even real, just the microphone catching static. It had to be something like that. Because if it wasn't, then I had to accept the unthinkable. That the man sleeping beside me was living a double life, and the house I called home was hiding someone else. For the next few days, I went through the motions like an actress playing herself. Breakfast, dishes, small talk. Daniel's voice filled the kitchen like nothing had ever happened. He laughed when I forgot to add sugar to his coffee. He kissed me before leaving for work, and every time I wanted to scream, "Who were you talking to that night?" But I didn't. I smiled, said drive safe, and watched him through the window until his car disappeared down the street. Then I'd stand there, in the silence that followed, feeling the air thicken around me. Carly didn't come back. I told her to take a week off, just until things settle. She didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't explain. We were both pretending the same lie, that nothing was wrong. That Monday, I tried to test myself, to prove the video was fake. I walked to the exact spot where Daniel had stood on the stairs. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the hallway clock. I turned on the same yellow light, replayed the footage, and looked for any reflection that could explain the shadow behind him. There was none. Still, I whispered into the air, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed softly, bouncing off the walls and dying in the hallway. Nothing. Just the house breathing in its old, heavy way. But for a second, a single, impossible second, I thought I heard movement above me, a faint shuffle like fabric brushing wood. I stared at the ceiling. Then I laughed. Old houses creak, I muttered, as if saying it out loud could make it true. That night, I tried to talk to Daniel. He was on the couch editing something on his laptop, glasses halfway down his nose. I sat beside him, pretending to scroll through my phone. You ever hear things in this house? I asked. He looked up, confused. Like what? I don't know, footsteps maybe. Or a voice. He chuckled softly. You mean your imagination? No, I mean, Nora, he interrupted gently, closing his laptop. This house is 70 years old. It talks. Wood expands. Pipes breathe. You've always been sensitive to that. He reached over, brushed my hair back. Promise me you won't let those sounds get to you. I nodded, forcing a smile. But when his fingers touched my face, I felt something different. Not tenderness, not warmth, just control, the kind that says, you're crazy for asking. Later that night, I sat in bed pretending to read while Daniel showered. The water ran for almost 20 minutes. When he came out, steam followed him into the room. He smelled like my shampoo, lavender and rose. He had never used it before. Ran out of mine, he said casually, toweling his hair. But when I checked the next morning, his bottle of cedarwood shampoo was still half full. Little things began piling up like quiet warnings. A hair tie on the bathroom counter, not mine. A chipped teacup I hadn't used in months sitting in the sink. A half-eaten apple on the desk in his study, already browned. Daniel never ate apples. He said they made his throat itch. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened every drawer in his study, searching for something. I didn't even know what. Letters? Receipts? Instead, I found a small flash drive labelled in his handwriting, Project M. He wasn't working on any M project, at least not one he'd mentioned to me. I plugged it into his old desktop. There were only 3 files, all video, all dated from the last 2 months. The first clip opened to our staircase again. Daniel stood in the same spot as before, but this time he wasn't whispering. He was listening. His head tilted, eyes fixed on something above the frame. Then, after a few seconds, he nodded, as if responding to someone I couldn't see. The second clip showed the same angle, but he was holding a plate of food. He lifted it, said something I couldn't hear, and then the plate moved, slightly, like a hand had reached out to take it. The third file wouldn't open. It was encrypted. My stomach twisted. I ejected the drive, shoved it back into the drawer, and sat there staring at the floor. Was this proof or madness? I didn't know which scared me more. That evening, I told myself I'd confront him. But when Daniel came home, he was holding takeout and smiling. Didn't feel like cooking, he said. Thought we could have Thai, your favourite. He opened a bottle of wine, poured me a glass, and talked about his day like nothing in the world was wrong. And for a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the house was fine, the whispers were wind, and my husband was still the man who kissed me goodbye at airports. Then, halfway through dinner, he said something that made my fork freeze mid-air. You know, he murmured, looking down at his plate, I dreamed about you last night. You were standing on the stairs watching me. You didn't say anything. You just looked. He smiled faintly. Strange dream, huh? My throat went dry. He didn't know I'd watched that video. He couldn't have known, unless he was testing me. I forced a laugh. Maybe your mind's playing tricks. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just miss you when you're too quiet. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. His skin felt warm, but his eyes, those steady grey eyes I'd once trusted completely, looked colder than I'd ever seen. That night, I pretended to sleep. When Daniel's breathing evened out beside me, I got up and walked quietly down the hall. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the fridge. I stood at the bottom of the stairs again, staring up into the darkness. My heart thudded so loudly it drowned out thought. I turned on my phone's flashlight, just for a second, and pointed it upward. Something moved. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a shape, a person, slipping behind the railing, vanishing into the corner of the second floor hallway. My flashlight flickered, my hand shaking. Then, from above, came a sound that made me nearly drop the phone. A whisper, low and familiar. "Nora." I froze. That voice, it wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't mine either. It was softer, raspier, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Then I heard Daniel behind me, half asleep, his voice cutting through the dark. "What are you doing, Nora?" I turned. He was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, face hidden in shadow, his tone calm, too calm. I didn't answer. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it made me want to run. "Come back to bed," he said softly. "There's nothing up there." But as I backed away toward him, my phone still pointed at the stairs, the light caught something glinting. A small silver bracelet, half hidden under the banister. A charm dangled from it. A letter M. The bracelet stayed in my pocket for 3 days before I found the courage to ask about it. A small silver chain, thin and delicate, with a single charm in the shape of an M. When I rubbed my thumb across the metal, it was warm, as if it had just been worn. I'd found it half hidden beneath the railing, but Daniel hadn't noticed. At least, I thought he hadn't. Since that night, he'd acted normal, almost too normal. He made breakfast, watered the plants, even played old jazz records while he worked. Every sound in the house should have been comforting. Instead, each one felt staged, like he was trying to create the illusion of calm, just for me. On the third morning, I slipped the bracelet into a small jewelry box in my drawer and went downstairs. Daniel was already in the kitchen, reading the newspaper. The smell of toast and coffee filled the air, thick enough to hide behind. "You're up early," I said, pretending to sound casual. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured without looking up. Wind kept knocking something around in the attic. The attic. My stomach clenched. He never mentioned that space before, not once in 15 years. "You went up there?" He shook his head. "No need, probably just a loose shutter. I'll fix it later." He sipped his coffee. His tone was light, but his hand trembled slightly against the mug. A small tremor, barely visible, but I saw it, because I was watching him like a hawk. After he left for work, I went upstairs. The house was silent except for the faint tick of the clock. The attic hatch sat above the hallway, a square of wood I'd stopped noticing years ago. Now I couldn't stop staring at it. There was dust on the frame, except for one spot, a clear fingerprint in the center. Fresh. I dragged the small folding ladder from the laundry room, climbed up, and pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. No creak, no whisper, no sound. Still, my heartbeat was so loud I thought I'd drown in it. I reached up, brushed the latch. It was locked. But what unnerved me wasn't that it was locked, it was that the lock was new. Polished metal, recently installed. We'd never replaced it. Daniel must have done it. Why? That afternoon, I decided to clean the fridge, a mindless task to keep my thoughts from eating themselves alive. When I opened the door, I froze. The package of sliced turkey was open, half gone. The milk was nearly empty, though I hadn't touched it in days. And the jar of pickles, the one Daniel always said smelled like chemicals, was sitting out on the counter, lid off. It wasn't the missing food that scared me. It was the pattern. Someone had eaten the way Daniel used to, back when he still loved food. Small bites, neat, methodical. Not random, not desperate, familiar. At dusk, I stood in the kitchen staring at the window above the sink. The reflection of the room behind me looked almost normal. Almost. Because for a split second, I saw movement in the corner. A flicker of something white near the stairs. I turned. Nothing. I told myself I needed air. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Children's bikes left on driveways, curtains drawn, distant sprinklers hissing in rhythm. Our house looked peaceful from the street. You'd never know how much fear it was holding in its walls. When I came back in, the scent hit me. A perfume I didn't own, sweet, heavy, with a metallic undertone. I followed it to the base of the stairs, heart pounding. The smell grew stronger with each step. Halfway up, I noticed something on the wall, a faint handprint, smaller than mine, pressed into the dust. That night, I didn't sleep. Daniel came home late, around midnight. He said he'd been at the office finishing edits. I sat on the couch, pretending to read. He smiled, kissed the top of my head, then went straight upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard him talking softly. At first, I thought it was a phone call, but the tone was wrong. He wasn't speaking to someone, he was soothing them, like a father comforting a frightened child. Then a pause, and another voice, faint, hoarse, unmistakably female. It said one word, please. I dropped the book. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, the door to his study was closed. The light was off. Silence. In the morning, Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He made oatmeal, whistled softly, and asked if I wanted to go for a walk. I said no. He looked disappointed, or pretended to. Then he left for the store. The moment the front door shut, I exhaled. I went straight to his study. The air inside felt used, warm, almost damp. I looked around, books stacked perfectly, desk spotless, curtains drawn. But something was off. There was a faint hum, like a fan or vent running somewhere above. I pressed my ear to the ceiling. The sound came from the attic. That afternoon, I called Carly. I didn't tell her much, just that I needed help with some cleaning while Daniel was away next week. She hesitated. I don't know, ma'am. I don't really like being there alone. You won't be, I said, my voice shaking. I need another pair of eyes. She agreed reluctantly. We set a day for Thursday, while Daniel would be at work. But that night, I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, right above our room. They stopped every few seconds, as if whoever it was listening too. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And when the sound finally stopped, I lay there wide awake until sunrise, waiting for Daniel to stir. He never did. The next morning, he told me he was leaving earlier than planned. Something came up in the city, he said, throwing a suitcase into the trunk. He kissed me goodbye and smiled that same tight smile he always used when hiding something. Then he drove off. As soon as the car disappeared, I locked the doors, shut the blinds, and went to the kitchen to make tea. The house was silent again, that kind of silence that buzzes in your ears. I sat at the table, watching the steam rise from my cup, telling myself I was safe now, alone, but safe. Then I heard it, a faint creak from upstairs, then another and another, steady, measured. Someone was walking in circles. The teacup slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the house, sharp as thunder. The footsteps stopped. For a full minute there was nothing, just my own breathing. Then, from the top of the stairs, a voice floated down. Not Daniel's, not a stranger's either. Soft, fragile, familiar. Don't tell him I'm here. I stood frozen, every muscle locking in place. The hallway was empty, but the scent of that same perfume drifted down again, thick, suffocating. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about ghosts or paranoia. Someone was living in my house, someone Daniel didn't want me to find, and she already knew my name. After that voice whispered from the stairs, something inside me changed. Fear stopped feeling sharp. It settled instead, heavy, cold, focused. I wasn't running anymore. I was watching. For the first time, I stopped asking why this was happening and started asking how long it had been happening. When Daniel called that afternoon, his tone was bright, casual. Just checking in, love. Did you get some rest? I did, I lied. House feels quiet. Good, he said. Keep it that way. Something about those words made my skin crawl. Keep it that way, like he was reminding me of a rule I hadn't agreed to. He said he'd be gone for 3 days. Business meetings in the city. He asked me not to worry if he didn't answer at night. Hotel Wi-Fi's terrible. He didn't know that I'd already stopped believing in his hotels. When the call ended, I sat there in the stillness, staring at the ceiling. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I texted Carly, "Change of plan, don't come Thursday, I'll handle it myself." She replied with a single emoji, a nervous thumbs up. I didn't blame her. If she'd heard that voice once, she wouldn't want to hear it again. I went online and ordered 2 small motion cameras, battery-powered, Wi-Fi connected. They arrived by noon, tiny black squares, unassuming. I placed one inside the vent above the stairs, facing the hallway. The other went behind a stack of books in Daniel's study. If there was someone in this house, I'd know. And if Daniel was lying, I'd know that too. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, eyes on the stairwell, the faint light from the vent blinking every few seconds. It was almost comforting, that tiny flash, like a heartbeat reminding me I wasn't imagining this. At 2:43 a.m., the camera pinged my phone. Motion detected. I opened the live feed. The screen flickered for a second, then focused. A figure was moving at the top of the stairs, barefoot, wearing a white cotton nightgown, thin and wrinkled. Her hair was long, tangled, falling over her face. She turned slowly, too slowly, and looked down toward the camera. My throat went dry. The image was grainy, but I saw it. She was smiling. I blinked, and in the next frame, she was gone. I replayed it 5 times, then 10. Each time the same. She appeared, turned, smiled, vanished. But what froze me wasn't the image, it was the timestamp. 2:43 a.m. That was the exact minute Daniel used to wake up for late-night writing sessions. The next day, I packed a small suitcase. I told Daniel, when he called, that I'd decided to visit my sister for the weekend. He seemed relieved. "Good, get some fresh air." "You don't mind me leaving?" "Of course not," he said with a soft laugh. "It'll give me some peace and quiet here." His words landed like ice water. He wanted the house quiet. For her. I waited until dusk, left the car in the driveway with my overnight bag in the passenger seat, then walked down the block to my neighbour's house, Mrs. Everett. She was an older widow who loved watching the neighbourhood like it was her personal TV channel. "Could you do me a favour?" I asked, lowering my voice. "If you see Daniel come back tonight, or anyone else, call me. Don't ask questions." She squinted, nodded slowly. "You think he's cheating?" I forced a smile. "I think I just need to know." Then I walked back, quiet as a shadow, slipped through the side door, and waited in the dark. Hours passed. The house stayed silent, wrapped in its usual false calm. Then, around midnight, I heard a car pull up. Headlights washed briefly across the curtains. Daniel's car. My heartbeat quickened. The front door opened softly, almost reverently, as if he was afraid to wake someone. His footsteps crossed the hardwood floor, no lights, just the faint rhythm of movement, confident and unhurried. He went straight upstairs. I watched him through the camera feed on my phone. He didn't turn on the hall light. He didn't need to. He moved like a man who'd done this 100 times. He paused on the top step, whispered something I couldn't catch. Then, another voice answered, low, female, tired. "You came back." I stopped breathing. Daniel stepped forward, out of view, and the door at the end of the hallway opened. The attic door. He disappeared inside. For several minutes, the feed showed nothing but darkness. Then, faint light leaked from beneath the door, a flickering glow, like a lamp burning low. I wanted to rush up there, scream, tear that door open. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed proof, not rage. Around 3 a.m., Daniel left the attic. He carried something, a tray maybe, with a bowl and a cup. He whispered something again before closing the door gently behind him. Then he went to our bedroom. I stayed where I was until dawn. When I finally crept upstairs, the air was thick with that same perfume, the one that wasn't mine. The attic door was shut tight. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing, just silence. But underneath that silence, I could feel someone breathing. I could almost hear the faint rustle of fabric, like someone turning over on a thin mattress. By morning, Daniel was gone again. No goodbye, no note, just a text. "See you Sunday," That was my chance. I called Carly. "Can you come now?" I said, voice trembling. "Please." She arrived within the hour, nervous but determined. When I opened the door, she looked pale. "I don't want to go upstairs," she whispered. "Not alone." "You won't," I promised. "Just help me move the ladder." We carried the ladder to the second-floor hallway. The attic hatch loomed above us, locked as always. I showed her the camera feed, the clip of Daniel entering, the woman's voice. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, he's keeping someone up there." I swallowed hard. "I just need to know who." We pushed the ladder under the hatch. My hands shook as I climbed the first few rungs. The metal was cold, biting my skin. I reached for the latch, the new, polished one. It wasn't locked. It turned easily under my fingers, like someone had been expecting me. A rush of warm, stale air spilled out, heavy with perfume and dust. I coughed, blinked through the dark, and lifted my phone light. At first, all I saw were boxes, old books, blankets, furniture under sheets. Then, in the farthest corner, a shape moved. A woman, thin, pale, sitting on the floor with her back to me. Her white gown shimmered faintly in the light. Her shoulders rose and fell with shallow breaths. Slowly, she turned her head. Our eyes met, hollow, grey, and endless. "He said you wouldn't come," she whispered. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor, its light spinning across the attic walls, catching on something behind her, a small iron bed, a tray of half-eaten food, and on the wall above her pillow, a row of photographs. Me, dozens of them, sleeping, smiling, cooking, everyone taken from inside my own house. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The air in the attic was thick, stale with dust, perfume, and something else beneath it. Something alive. The woman in the corner blinked at me slowly, her lips trembling like she'd forgotten how to form words. Behind her, the wall full of photographs seemed to pulse under the beam of my fallen phone light. Dozens of pictures of me, frozen in moments I never meant to share. Cooking, sleeping, reading by the window, everyone taken from somewhere inside this house. Who are you?" I whispered. The woman tilted her head, her hair falling away from her face. She was older than I expected, maybe late 30s, but her features were sunken, her skin ghost pale, eyes rimmed in grey shadows. She looked malnourished, fragile, and yet there was a strange grace to her, like someone who had learned to survive without sunlight. "Please," she said softly, "don't tell him you saw me." Her voice, I recognized it. The whisper from the stairs, the one that had said my name. "You're the one who's been living here," I said. She nodded weakly. "He said it was safer this way." "Safer?" "For both of us." I wanted to ask more, but before I could, the sound of a car engine drifted through the attic window, tires on gravel, then the slam of a door. Daniel. Carly's eyes widened. "He's home," she mouthed. My stomach turned to ice. He wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday. He wasn't supposed to see this. "Go," the woman whispered urgently. "Go before he knows you're here." "I can't just leave you." "Please," she said, grabbing my wrist. "You don't understand. He gets angry when—" The sound of the front door opening cut her off. The heavy, calm rhythm of Daniel's footsteps filled the house below. He was calling my name. "Nora? You home early again?" Each word rose through the floorboards like heat from a fire. I turned to Carly. Her face was pale, eyes darting toward the ladder. "Get down," I whispered. "Now." We scrambled for the hatch. Carly went first, her shoes slipping on the rungs. I turned back to the woman in white. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. Her lips barely moved. "Marissa," she said. Then she reached up, quickly, almost desperately, and pressed something into my hand. A small folded paper, stained and soft from sweat. "If he finds me," she whispered, "read this." Before I could respond, The ladder rattled beneath me. Daniel's voice came from below, calm, curious. "What are you doing up there?" I froze. Carly had already reached the floor, backing away, her hand over her mouth. I forced a laugh. "Just cleaning," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Thought I heard something." There was a pause, too long, then Daniel chuckled, soft, amused, dangerous. "You hate cleaning." I climbed down slowly, the folded note burning in my palm. When my feet hit the floor, Daniel was standing in the hallway, one hand resting casually on the wall, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "You didn't tell me you were coming home early," he said. "You didn't tell me you'd be back tonight," I replied. He smiled, that slow, deliberate smile that used to make me feel safe. Now it made me want to scream. "Why are you shaking?" he asked softly. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." He took a step closer. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, cedar and tobacco layered over something sweeter. Perfume, the same scent that lingered in the hall. Carly stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Grant, I think I should go." Daniel turned to her, polite but sharp. "No need, Carly. You've done enough." Something in his tone made her flinch. She grabbed her bag and ran for the door. When it slammed shut behind her, the silence that followed felt suffocating. Daniel looked at me again, eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been busy," he said, setting up cameras, asking questions. My blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" He smiled. "Come on, Nora. You think I wouldn't notice a flashing red light in my own house?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't have gone up there." "Up where?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The attic," he said simply. "It's not safe." "Safe for who?" "For her." The way he said it, gentle, almost protective, sent a shiver through me. "Marissa?" I whispered. His eyes flicked up, just for a second, but it was enough. The truth was there, hiding in plain sight. "She's sick," he said finally. "She needs help. I'm the only one who understands her." "You're keeping her," I said, my voice shaking. "You're feeding her, hiding her, saving her," he snapped, the mask slipping for the first time. "You wouldn't understand, Nora. You never understood me." The words hit me like a slap. He wasn't angry that I'd found her. He was angry that I'd interrupted whatever twisted fantasy he'd built here. "She's been here for how long?" I demanded. "Long enough," he said quietly. "Long enough for her to matter." My throat tightened. "Who is she?" He hesitated, then smiled again, softer this time, almost tender. "Someone who listens." He took another step toward me. "Do you know what it's like to live with someone who doesn't hear you anymore?" "You mean your wife?" "I mean my silence," he said. "You filled it with noise. She fills it with peace." For a second, I saw the man I used to love, the careful, articulate Daniel who could twist any sentence into poetry. And that was when I realized it. He believed every word he was saying. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the folded note Marissa had given me. I unfolded it slowly, keeping my eyes on him. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If you're reading this, he lied to you too. I didn't choose this. He found me. He said he'd help. He won't let me leave." My chest tightened. I looked up. "You told me she was sick." "She is," he said, stepping closer. "No," I whispered. "She's trapped." His expression hardened. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he reached for the note, quick, violent. I stepped back, the paper tore in half. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "You'll ruin everything." "Everything?" I said. "You mean your secret prisoner upstairs?" He grabbed my wrist, hard enough to make me gasp. "I saved her, Nora. You should thank me." I stared at him, at the man I'd once built my life around, and saw only a stranger wearing his face. A sound echoed from above, a slow, dragging thump, then another. Both of us froze. Then a voice floated down through the ceiling. "Daniel." Marissa's voice, soft, afraid, but not for herself, for me. Daniel's grip tightened. "Stay here," he said. I tore my wrist free. "No!" He turned, but I was already moving. I ran for the stairs, heart hammering, his footsteps thundering behind me. The attic door was still open. Marissa stood in the middle of the room, shaking, clutching the bedpost for balance. Her eyes were wide with terror. "He's not who you think he is," she said. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his voice low, desperate. "Marissa, please, don't." She looked at me, tears running down her face. "He told me you were dead." The world tilted. "What?" I whispered. "He said you died in the accident, that I could stay here until he was ready to move on." I turned to Daniel. "You told her I was dead?" He didn't answer. He just looked between us, two women standing on opposite sides of his lie, and exhaled. "You both needed me," he said softly, "and I needed you to stay quiet." Something inside me snapped. All the fear, the confusion, the denial, it erupted. I lunged for the ladder, yanked it down with all my strength. Daniel stumbled, lost his balance, fell backward down the hall. The crash echoed through the house like thunder. Marissa screamed. I pulled her toward the hatch. "Come on," I said, choking on tears. "We're leaving." She hesitated. "He'll find us." Not anymore. We climbed down together, barefoot, trembling. Daniel groaned somewhere in the hallway, his voice weak but still dangerous. "You can't live without me," he muttered. "Watch me," I said. We ran outside, into the cold night air. The world felt too big after the suffocating attic, the streetlights, the wind, the taste of freedom. Marissa clung to me, her hands shaking. I called 911 with fingers that barely worked. When the operator asked what happened, I said the only truth I could manage. My husband's been keeping someone in my house, and I think he still believes he's saving her. The red and blue lights bled through the fog that night, flashing against the white walls of our house like a slow, broken heartbeat. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors stood in doorways, whispering names and theories. I sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me, watching my house, my home, become a crime scene. Daniel was handcuffed near the porch. He didn't fight, didn't shout. He just stood there quietly, his eyes somewhere far away, as if the whole thing were a misunderstanding he'd wake from any minute. When the officers guided him into the car, he finally looked at me. That calm, unnerving smile still there, faint, polite, almost loving. "You'll thank me one day," he said softly. The car door shut before I could answer. Inside the ambulance, the heat wrapped around us. Marissa sat beside me, trembling under another blanket. She hadn't spoken since the police arrived. Her wrists were bruised, her skin pale and thin, as if she'd been kept under low light for years. A paramedic tried to take her vitals, but she flinched at every touch. When the cuff tightened around her arm, she whispered, "Don't lock it." So softly the medic didn't even hear. I did. I heard everything now, every breath, every small sound that wasn't supposed to exist. For weeks, my world had been filled with silence, the kind that hides things. Now, it was filled with noise again, and I couldn't tell which felt worse. At the police station, the fluorescent lights hummed like they were alive. The detective, a woman named Sanders, asked if I wanted water. I shook my head. My hands were clasped so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. "Mrs. Grant," she said gently, "we need to understand what happened in that house." "So do I replied. I told them everything. The video, the voices, the bracelet, the smell, the attic. How Daniel had changed. Or maybe how I'd finally started noticing who he really was. Detective Sanders listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she leaned back. "We found evidence he'd been keeping her there for at least 6 months," she said. food supplies, medical equipment, clothing. He'd converted part of the attic into a small living space. 6 months? That's the minimum we can prove. 6 months, half a year of dinners, laughter, kisses goodnight, all while another woman lived above me. I felt something crack deep in my chest, quiet but final. Why? I whispered. Why would he do that? Sanders looked at me for a long moment before answering. She said he told her you were dead, that he was protecting her. He met her at a local writing workshop. She'd been struggling, isolated. He told her he could help, that he'd give her a place to heal. Then he just never let her go. The rest of that night blurred into paperwork and silence. When I was finally allowed to leave, the air outside felt too big for me. Marissa was taken to the hospital for evaluation. I didn't ask to see her. I couldn't yet. It felt like looking at her would make everything real again. The attic, the whispers, the years of not knowing the man beside me. I drove to a motel on the edge of town and sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. The room smelled like old soap and cigarettes. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat on the bed, staring at my hands. They were still trembling, though I wasn't cold. At some point, I realized I was still holding the torn halves of Marissa's note in my coat pocket. I laid them on the bedspread, fit the edges together. The last line caught in my throat. He said he'd save me, but he only wanted to keep me quiet. I thought of all the times Daniel had told me the same thing in different words. Calm down. You're overreacting. You don't need to worry about that. Every sentence that felt like comfort had really been a leash. The next morning, Detective Sanders called. They'd found more evidence, journals, recordings, even drafts of books Daniel had been ghostwriting under other names. He'd used Marissa's ideas, her words, the way he used mine, control disguised as creation. They asked if I wanted to attend the initial hearing. I said yes. I needed to see him one more time, not to understand, but to confirm that the man I loved no longer existed. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and nerves. When they brought Daniel in, his hands cuffed, his hair slightly disheveled, he looked exactly the same. That was the worst part. Nothing about him looked monstrous. He could have been any man waiting for a train, reading a paper, drinking black coffee. He didn't look at me at first. He only glanced once when they read the charges. Unlawful confinement, assault, coercion, falsifying identity. Then his eyes met mine across the room and he smiled faintly. Not guilt, not shame, something else, possession. He's not going to stop looking at you, Detective Sanders murmured beside me. People like him don't lose control, they lose their audience. Her words sank into me like ice. After the hearing, I drove back to the house one last time. It was still taped off, yellow strips fluttering in the wind. I stood outside the gate, staring at the second-floor window where the attic stairs began. It was open slightly, curtain moving with the breeze. I imagined the smell of her perfume still hanging in the air, mixed with dust and memory. I thought about burning the place down, but instead I turned around and walked away. That night, I visited Marissa at the hospital. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in the hospital bed, IV lines trailing from her wrist. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. You didn't, I said. He did. I thought he was helping me. So did I. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were thin and cold. You know what's strange? She said softly. What? He made us both believe we were safe. Later, in the hallway, Detective Sanders handed me a small box. From evidence, she said. We thought you might want this. Inside was the silver bracelet, the one I'd found by the stairs. It was cleaned, polished, glinting under the fluorescent lights. I closed the lid and nodded. Keep it, Sanders said. It belongs to you now, in a way. Maybe she was right. Maybe we were all just collecting the remains of what he took from us. pieces of time, trust, voice. That night in the motel, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the attic. The pale light, the wall of photographs, my own face staring back at me, smiling, unaware. I realized I didn't just feel haunted by him, I was haunted by myself, by the version of me that trusted without question, that mistook quiet for peace. The next morning, I booked a storage unit and moved out everything I owned. The house would go up for sale next month. I didn't want to see it again. But before I left, I drove one last time past the neighborhood. The dawn light fell soft over the rooftops. And as I passed the house, I saw something in the attic window. A flicker of movement, a shadow, just for a second. Then nothing. The day after the hearing, Detective Sanders called again. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "We finished cataloguing his journals," she said. "Journals?" I repeated. "A whole box of them. You might want to come in." Part of me wanted to hang up. The other part, the part that had survived the attic, needed to know. The police evidence room smelled of dust and printer ink. Sanders led me to a long table covered in notebooks, more than a dozen, each labelled by year. Some were cracked leather, others were clean and new. The first one she opened was dated 2013, the year we bought the house. The handwriting was Daniel's, neat and deliberate. Every line was dated, every page numbered, as if he'd been documenting a case instead of a life. The first few entries were harmless: grocery lists, ideas for edits, reflections on his work. Then the tone shifted. March 5th. Nora doesn't listen anymore. She fills the silence with noise. I need quiet to think. April 22nd. Silence is discipline. Words are tools. She wastes them. June 11th. I met someone who understands stillness. I flipped the page. The name appeared for the first time, Marissa. His first description of her read like a character introduction, not a person. She reminds me of what Nora used to be before the noise. She's soft-spoken, observant. She doesn't interrupt. When I talk, she listens, not to answer, but to absorb. I feel like I could build something perfect out of her quiet. I felt my stomach twist. Even on paper, his affection sounded surgical, detached, constructed. He wasn't falling in love. He was conducting an experiment. Sanders watched my face carefully. "There's more," she said, sliding another notebook forward. "Last year." The handwriting was rougher here, hurried, the entries darker. "August 4th. She wanted to leave. She doesn't understand. The world will chew her up. I'm saving her from it." August 17th. Nora doesn't see what I've done for her either. Two ungrateful women living under the same roof. One above, one below, both mine to keep safe. The words blurred. I could barely breathe. My hands trembled as I turned to the last entry. October 29th. I hear her voice at night. Not Marissa's, Nora's, even when she's asleep. I think she's starting to know. I'll have to fix it soon. Fix it. The phrase sat on the page like a stain. Sanders closed the notebook gently. "He was obsessed with control," she said. "He didn't see you or Marissa as people. You were pieces in his story." Story? He called you characters. In his mind, he wasn't committing crimes, he was writing them. She handed me a manila folder, a printed email exchange between Daniel and one of his editors. The subject line read, "New concept, the House of Quiet." The email was dated 2 months before I found the bracelet. It's about two women, one living, one hidden, both connected by a man who believes silence is salvation. He loves them both, but neither understands him. The twist is that they're the same person, divided by time. I stared at the screen. It wasn't a story idea. It was our life, our house, our voices. When I left the station, the world outside felt tilted. The sky was too bright, the sounds too sharp. I sat in the car for nearly an hour before I realized I was still holding the last notebook. It was open to a blank page, the paper yellowed at the edges. And in the corner, written faintly in pencil, were 3 words: the perfect ending. For weeks, I tried to move on. Therapy, paperwork, endless questions. The house was sold to a young couple who'd never heard of us. I gave away most of the furniture. But some nights, I'd still wake up around 2:43 a.m., the time the motion camera had first caught her moving, not from nightmares, but from habit, as if my body still expected to hear footsteps above me. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and typed Daniel's name into the search bar. The story had gone public. Local editor arrested for holding woman captive. They called him the gentleman ghostwriter. Commenters argued about whether he was insane or brilliant. No one mentioned that the house had belonged to me too. No one called me anything. That was when I realized how small victims become in stories, even their own. A week later, I received a letter from the correctional facility. No return name, but I knew the handwriting. It was Daniel's. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Nora, you've always misunderstood what I was doing. I wasn't hiding her from you. I was protecting both of you from the noise. You talk too much. You fill the world with panic, with fear. She listened. You screamed. I just wanted peace. They'll say I'm sick, but I'm not. I made something beautiful. You destroyed it. But I forgive you. One day, you'll understand that silence is love. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the desk. Then I lit a match and burned it. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. The smell of smoke filled the room, sharp and oddly sweet. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. 2 weeks later, Marissa was released from the hospital. She moved to a shelter in another city under a new name. We talked once before she left. Her voice was steadier now, but she still spoke softly, as if afraid of breaking the air. I found something in the attic before I left, she told me. I think he meant it for you. She handed me a small, sealed envelope. Inside was a photograph, one I'd never seen before. It showed Daniel sitting at his desk, writing, sunlight spilling across his face. Behind him, in the mirror on the wall, you could see me standing in the doorway, blurred, half out of frame. Underneath, in neat handwriting, he'd written, "The observer completes the story." I stared at it for a long time, then tore it in half. Because he was wrong. I wasn't the observer anymore. I was the one who lived. Months later, I started journaling. Not for him, for me. The first page was blank for days until I finally wrote a single line. There's no such thing as a perfect ending, only the courage to keep living after the story ends. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't feel like control, it felt like peace. The trial began 6 months after Daniel's arrest. By then, my hair had grown out an inch, and the bruise on my wrist had faded to the color of old paper. People said time heals everything. They never said what it does to memory. Reporters camped outside the courthouse every morning. They wanted headlines, not truth. The captive woman, the silent husband, the wife who didn't know. No one ever wrote the house that lied. That was what it felt like. A structure built on deceit, every beam nailed down with silence. I sat behind the prosecution table, hands folded in my lap. Across the room, Daniel looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just contained. He wore the same grey suit he'd worn to weddings and funerals, as if this were both. When the judge entered, he stood, eyes lowered, posture perfect. That was Daniel, disciplined even in disgrace. The prosecutor laid everything out with surgical precision. The cameras, the journals, the voice recordings, the photographs, every piece of evidence that had turned my life inside out. When they played one of the recordings, his voice whispering to Marissa, telling her, "You're safe here." I felt the room tighten. It wasn't rage I felt. It was pity, cold and reluctant. He sounded like a man talking to his own reflection. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand, palms sweating. The microphone smelled like metal. I could see Daniel watching me, calm, almost curious. "Please state your name." "Nora Grant." "Mrs. Grant, how long were you married to the defendant?" 15 years. I told them about the video, the attic, the nights of whispers. The judge's pen stopped moving halfway through my story. For a moment, the courtroom felt like the attic again, silent, suspended, every breath held hostage by what I was saying. When I finished, Daniel leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. Then he looked at me, mouth curling into that faint, polite smile. It was almost a goodbye. Marissa testified the next day. She wore a plain blue dress the shelter had given her. Her voice trembled, but she never looked away from him. He said I couldn't go outside, she told the court, that people wouldn't understand. He said I was safer in the dark. The room stayed silent even after she sat down. The judge's gavel didn't need to fall. The truth already had. When the verdict finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. Guilty on all counts, 20 years, no parole for the first 10. The courtroom exhaled. I didn't. Daniel didn't turn to look at me as they led him away. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He simply straightened his jacket and walked out of the room like a man leaving a meeting that had run too long. That was his final act of control, pretending he still had some. The reporters swarmed as soon as the doors opened. Microphones, flashes, questions that sounded more like accusations. Did you really not know? Do you forgive him? What happens to the house now? I didn't answer. I just kept walking. The courthouse steps felt endless. Sunlight too bright. At the bottom, Detective Sanders waited with her hands in her coat pockets. It's over, she said. No, I replied. It's just quieter. The story burned through the news cycle for a week and then vanished, replaced by fresher tragedies. But online, it kept living. People dissected our faces, our tones, our choices. Some pitied me, some blamed me. A few even romanticized him. I stopped reading after someone wrote, maybe he just loved too much. I learned something then. Once your life becomes a story, you lose the right to edit it. I moved to a smaller town, a rental house near the coast. The air there smelled of salt and pine, clean and open. No attics, just skylights. I got a dog, a quiet rescue mutt named Pepper who followed me from room to room. At night, when the wind rattled the windows, she would lift her head, ears twitching, as if guarding me from ghosts. Maybe she was. I started teaching art again at the community centre. At first, my voice shook every time I addressed a class. But paint has a way of listening that people don't. It lets you say things without being interrupted. Slowly, colour began to replace silence. Marissa called me once from a new number. She'd changed her name. I never asked to know it. Her voice sounded stronger. I'm writing again, she said. Nothing dark, just small stories. That's good, I told her. Keep writing. You too. After the call ended, I realised she'd said you too like she believed I still had something left to say. Maybe I did. A few months later, a package arrived at my new address. No return label. Inside was a book. A paperback copy of The House of Quiet, Daniel's unpublished manuscript. The publisher must have released it after the trial, capitalising on curiosity. I almost threw it away. But then I opened the first page. The dedication read, "For N, who never heard me coming." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I closed the book and placed it on the shelf, not as a memory, but as evidence. Proof that monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they look like husbands who read poetry before bed. Sometimes people from the class ask me about that story. They lower their voices, as if tragedy were contagious. I tell them the same thing every time. What happened in that house isn't the story. The story is what happens after you leave. They usually smile politely, not really understanding. That's okay, I'm still learning it myself. One evening, I drove back to Savannah for a gallery exhibit. It was raining, soft, persistent rain that blurred the world into watercolour. On the drive back, I passed the old neighbourhood. I don't know why I turned down that street. Habit, maybe. Or unfinished business. The house was still there, freshly painted, new curtains in the windows. A family lived there now, laughter spilling out, warm light glowing from inside. Through the second floor window, I saw a child, a little girl, waving a flashlight, chasing shadows on the ceiling. For a second, I thought I saw a shape move behind her. My heart stuttered. Then the mother appeared, scooping her up, laughing. Just a family, just life moving on. I sat there in the rain, tears I didn't feel running down my face. Then I whispered the words I'd been afraid to say out loud. You don't own me anymore. When I got home, the dog was waiting at the door, tail thumping softly. I hung my coat, made tea, and opened my sketchbook. For the first time, I drew the attic, the stairs, the narrow window, the faint glow of the lamp. But in my version, the door was open and light was spilling out. At the bottom of the page, I wrote, "Justice isn't about what they take from you, it's about what you choose to reclaim." And for once, I believed it. Healing is nothing like the movies. There's no sunrise where everything suddenly feels whole again. There's no soft music when you forgive the person who broke you. Real healing is quiet, like a house after everyone has left. You move through the rooms of your own mind, dusting corners you were too afraid to touch. Some days it feels like peace. Most days it feels like work. For a long time after the trial, I lived in fragments. Every morning started the same: coffee, silence, checking the locks, twice. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the world to remind me that safety was temporary. Sometimes I'd wake up convinced I heard footsteps above me. Other times I'd turn on every light in the house just to watch the darkness shrink. It was exhausting, but it was real. And that mattered more than pretending I was fine. People told me to move on. They said things like, "You're free now," or "You're stronger for what you went through." They meant well, but they didn't understand that freedom feels strange when you've spent years doubting your own perception. Even silence can sound threatening when it's been used against you. So I stopped trying to move on. Instead, I learnt to live with the noise, with the shadows, with the echo of a man who mistook control for love. My therapist once asked me, "When did you stop trusting yourself?" The question stayed with me for weeks. At first, I thought the answer was simple, the night I saw the video. But it wasn't. It was smaller. 1,000 tiny concessions over 15 years. Every time I said, "You're right, dear," when I knew he wasn't. Every time I apologized for being too emotional. Every time I told myself that calmness meant safety. Daniel didn't take my freedom all at once. He took it in fractions, wrapped inside kindness, hidden in sentences that sounded like love. By the time I realized it, I'd already started editing myself for him. That's what scared me most after it was over, not that he lied, but that I'd been complicit in the silence. One afternoon, I sat at the pier watching the tide roll in, grey and endless. A man beside me was teaching his daughter to fish. She couldn't have been older than 6, all freckles and braids. She asked a question, and he laughed. That soft, patient laugh fathers are supposed to have. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel bitterness watching love, just distance, like observing a language I used to speak but had forgotten the words for. When I went home that night, I opened my sketchbook again. I drew that little girl and her father, the curve of their hands, the line of the fishing rod between them. Then, almost without thinking, I added a third figure, a woman sitting nearby, half in shadow, watching the ocean. No face, just a presence. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was every woman who's ever had to rebuild herself from silence. Marissa wrote me a letter that same month. No return address, just careful handwriting, still slightly shaky. It said, "Dear Nora, sometimes I still wake up afraid of the ceiling. I still dream of that attic, of the sound of him walking up the stairs. But then I open my window and hear the traffic outside, and I remember, that's the sound of the world, not him. We survived the story, now we get to write our own. M." I read that letter 3 times, then placed it between the pages of my sketchbook. Not to keep it safe, but to remind myself that even the darkest stories can leave room for a sequel. As the months passed, people stopped asking about Daniel. They started asking about me. Was I seeing anyone? Did I still believe in marriage? Would I ever trust again? The truth is, I don't know if I believe in forever anymore. I believe in moments, in mornings where the coffee tastes right, in friends who notice when you're quiet for too long, in dogs who sleep by your door because they choose to, not because you trained them to. I believe in love, but not the kind that promises peace, the kind that allows chaos and still stays. Healing, I've learned, isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone who can live with what happened without letting it define you. Sometimes when I walk by a bookstore, I see one of Daniel's old novels on the shelf, the ones he published before everything, his name printed neatly on the spine. People still buy them, I guess. Sometimes I think about taking them all down, one by one. Other times I think, let them stay. Let the words rot quietly on paper, the way his voice does in my memory. He wrote stories about women who needed saving. I'm writing one about a woman who saved herself. The first time I laughed again, really laughed, was almost by accident. It was at the art centre during a kids' workshop. One of the girls spilled blue paint all over her project and burst into tears. I knelt beside her, dipped my finger into the paint, and drew a heart right in the middle of the mess. She giggled through her sniffles. "You fixed it," she said. "No," I smiled. "We just made something new." That night, I thought about those words. Something new. That's what healing really is. Not fixing, transforming. Sometimes when it rains, I still talk to the house, the one we left behind. In my head, I tell it that I forgive it for keeping secrets, that I understand now it was just walls and wood. It didn't choose who lived inside. And in that strange way, forgiving the house helped me forgive myself. There's a quote I wrote in my journal not long ago. Trauma is the ghost that stays until you learn to live beside it. It doesn't vanish. But one day, you stop flinching when it passes through the room. A year after the trial, I held my first small exhibition, Shadows and Silence. The last painting in the collection was titled The Attic Door. It showed a woman standing in front of a staircase, holding a lantern. The door above her is half open, and a beam of light spills down onto her face. Not harsh, not golden, just enough to see by. When a reporter asked what it meant, I told her, "It's not about fear, it's about curiosity." I stopped being afraid of what's in the dark the day I decided to climb the stairs. After the gallery closed, I walked home alone through the drizzle. The city hummed softly, car tires on wet pavement, distant sirens, the occasional laugh. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds. When I reached my door, I paused. For once, I didn't check the lock. I just went inside, turned off the lights, and let the dark settle. It wasn't silence anymore. It was quiet. And there's a difference. When I started telling this story, I thought it was about betrayal, about lies and secrets and the monster I lived with. But the more I speak it out loud, the more I realize it's really about the quiet, about what grows in it, what survives it, and what we choose to do when it's finally gone. There was a time I believed silence was safety. Daniel taught me that. He made stillness look like peace, like control, like love. But silence isn't peace. It's a cage without bars. It's what happens when your voice forgets what freedom sounds like. I spent 15 years inside that quiet, convincing myself it was enough. And when I finally heard the noise, the whispers, the creaks, the small defiance of truth, I was terrified. Not because I thought something was wrong, but because I knew deep down something finally was right. The house was trying to speak. And for once, I listened. People ask me now if I've forgiven him. I always say the same thing. Forgiveness is not a gift for the guilty. It's a release for the living. I don't forgive what he did, but I forgive myself for staying, for believing that love could be earned by silence, for mistaking fear for loyalty. Because healing isn't about rewriting the story, it's about reclaiming the voice that was stolen from it. Sometimes I still see him in my dreams, not the man in handcuffs, the man folding my clothes, making coffee, quoting poetry as if it could fix the cracks in our lives. He asks me why I had to ruin everything, and I tell him the same thing every time, because everything you built was already broken. Then I wake up and the air feels lighter. Marissa and I still write to each other sometimes, not about the past, but about small, ordinary things. Books, recipes, the weather. I think we both crave the normalcy of sentences that don't bleed. She's studying again, somewhere far away, under another name. She told me she keeps a window open at night, just to remind herself the air belongs to her. I liked that. I started doing it too. Even when it rains. A few weeks ago, I visited the art centre to prepare for another exhibit. It was late. The hall was empty. I stood in front of my last painting, the attic door. The light in the frame spilled outward, touching the corners of the canvas like sunrise. And I thought about that day, the dust, the fear, the smell of her perfume, and the sound of my own heartbeat screaming at me to look away. I didn't. And that made all the difference. Sometimes courage doesn't look like fighting. Sometimes it's just staying in the room long enough to see the truth. I still keep one of Daniel's notebooks, not as a relic but as proof. It sits on a shelf, sealed, unread. I don't open it, not because I'm afraid of what's inside, but because I no longer need to understand him to understand myself. He built his world from words meant to control. I'm building mine from words meant to free. If you're listening to this, maybe you've lived inside your own version of silence. Maybe you've told yourself it's not that bad. Maybe you've mistaken comfort for safety or calm for kindness. I did too. But listen to me carefully. Love that asks you to shrink isn't love. It's fear wearing a kind face. And the longer you stay quiet, the smaller you become. So if your house creaks at night, if something inside you whispers that something's wrong, don't hush it. That sound is your courage trying to get out. Let it speak. I don't know what Daniel dreams about now, in whatever cell he's in. I don't care. Maybe he still imagines me as a character in his story, the wife who betrayed him, the one who didn't understand. But that's the beauty of truth. When you finally tell your own story, you stop belonging to anyone else's. Some nights, I light a candle by the window, not out of fear, out of gratitude, for the house that taught me how to listen, for the stranger who became my sister in survival, for the silence that finally broke. And when the flame flickers, I think of one line I wrote the night before the trial. In a moment of clarity I didn't yet understand. The dark doesn't end when you turn on the light. It ends when you stop being afraid to see what's there. So this is me finally closing the door, not locking it, just letting it rest. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting the attic, it means building a new house where no one has to hide again. My name is Nora Grant, and for the first time in 15 years, I can finally say this out loud. I'm home. If this story found you tonight, maybe it was meant to. Somewhere, someone is still living in silence, just like I did. If you've ever loved the wrong person, or if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the ashes of trust, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if you've ever found the courage to speak after being quiet for too long, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and share it. Not for me, but for the next person who needs to hear. You are not the silence. You are the voice that breaks it. With love, Nora Grant.